Is the creator economy in collapse? Are YouTubers and content creators and others increasingly struggling to make things work? I wanted to bring this particular topic to you this week because over the past week or two, we've seen a couple of reasonably popular YouTube channels announcing that they are either taking hiatuses or folding in one way or another. Earlier on today, Ian Danskin of Innuendo Studios, who makes the or made recently, I think he sort of tied the series up recently, the excellent alt-right playbook series, announced that, as he put it in the title to this video, that being a YouTuber had bankrupted him. This comes not super long after, maybe a couple of weeks after, 3 weeks after, a video from Wisecrack in which Michael from Wisecrack announced that the show and channel as it had existed until recently was also no more. Dead, I think, is the word that he explicitly used in this announcement. Two different processes, I think it's worth saying, that have happened. One being, as far as I can tell from watching his announcement, Ian having decided to take a slightly different approach going forward, maybe looking at doing it alongside some other kind of work. Wisecrack, a slightly different story in which the company that owns the channel, because Wisecrack has been for a long time sort of corporately owned, had decided to fold it. I wanted to talk a little bit about whether or not these things are representative of broader shifts in the industry, and whether the context in which content creators, be they people making excellent sort of politically infused analytical work like Wisecrack and Innuendo Studios, or people making any other kind of thing that you like on the internet, has the context in which they are working changed to a degree which might change what is possible and what is not. As someone is saying in the chat, it's worth saying that Michael from Wisecrack has since started his own kind of venture under his own steam, I guess. His own channel, so you can. He is nearing 100,000 subscribers, so you can head on over there and help him out. It is also worth saying that Ian Danskin behind Innuendo Studios, part of his talk is about his sort of report video, whatever you want to call this here, is talking about how he has lost a reasonable amount of money making YouTube videos over the past decade or so, and he also has put together a GoFundMe where anyone who wants to help him kind of get back to zero, as it were, is able to do so. And there are a number of things, and there are a number of kind of factors here, some of which have just come up in the chat. First name bunch of numbers saying private equity firms buying media always ends badly. Now, I don't know for sure whether the company that owns Wisecrack is a private equity company per se. It is a private company of some description, and there has always been a challenge with YouTube channels which are corporately owned in some way. It usually comes with a bunch of additional responsibilities in terms of how you can do things. That once a channel is within some larger corporate structure, that I guess there's presumably a lot more, I don't know, red tape or whatever we might want to call it, to comply with. I think there's also sort of a corporate view of doing things which maybe isn't quite as fleet of foot as that which a sustainable YouTube channel kind of needs to be. In fact, I hadn't actually thought of it until now, but I was watching a video a couple of days ago by Modern MBA, which I don't know if I can speak much to I've not seen a huge number of their videos, which talking about the kind of rise and fall of some of those early kind of new media unicorns. So the Vice medias, the Voxes, BuzzFeed, all of those media companies which really exploded just over a decade or so ago. Huffington Post, yes, as it's the Morton, a lot of which then struggled. Vice News is still going for a while. It was owned by the Saudi government, which was an interesting twist. And of course, Vox continues to make stuff and to put stuff out. I think it is not quite at the height of its powers, as it were. I mean, we look over some of its recent videos. We've got 114,000 views, 38,000 views, 70,000 views, 86,000 views. There's a 1.6 million here. There's a 1.2 million there. Like, it's still putting out some bangers. However, it's certainly true to say that it's not quite where it was a little while ago. And I think the challenge that Vox had is a slightly different one to some more recent channels, like a Wisecrack, for example. One of the difficulties that Vox always had was that once it kind of hit its peak, a lot of its talent left to forge their own channels. The result being that kind of, on YouTube, in the kind of new media sphere, people really connect to people. They connect to individual creators, individual presenters. And so I think once Vox lost its Johnny Harris and its Cleo Abrams and its Phil Edwards and all of these people that kind of, to a lot of viewers, probably were Vox, I think it's kind of struggled to rebuild that to an extent. TED Talks as well. So TED currently is relaunching it's looking for new leadership, I think is the best way of saying. I mean, it still continues to put out videos. I mean, they still get some views. Carol Cadwallader's recent one, I have seen all over the place, and someone recommended it to me in person recently. Like, it still has to some occasion, it still occasionally has the ability to kind of be that water cooler thing. But TED has a kind of different problem again, wherein I think TED's moment kind of passed. In the sense that it was really bonded to that kind of techno-optimism of, almost 20 years ago now. This idea that the internet was going to democratize knowledge and networks and all of this other kind of stuff, and that was going to lead us naturally onto some better world through a kind of liberal notion of linear progress, which we're not in that space anymore, right? The fact that Carol Cadwallader's talk here, which describes the rise of Trump as a digital coup, the fact that that's the one with 1.3 million and all of the rest, there's a lot of sub 50k, sub 40k, sub 30k videos here in a way that would have been unthinkable 20, 15, maybe even 10 years ago, is interesting, right? Even this how AI models steal creative work and what to do about it. This one has 165,000 views, whereas some of the, just a lot of the how to handle grief at work and beyond, which is kind of slightly more corporate one, which have always been a part of TED's stable. There's always been a bit of a mix of activists talking about stuff and then, someone who otherwise would be doing corporate training, doing something a little bit corporate wonky. But it's intriguing that, any of the more positive stuff here, the more kind of techno-future-y kind of stuff, some of it's done okay. But it's the negative stuff now, because we are in an era of techno-pessimism. Morinaka saying, I always thought the TEDx spin-off brand cheapened the main talks. Yeah, to some extent, I think that might be the case. I always find it interesting when you see people who in their Twitter have got like TEDx speaker, and you're like, cool, man. Like, I don't know, some well-meaning teenagers invited you to do a TEDx talk. That's nice. Like, and hopefully you had fun, but it's not the same thing, is it? I also think that TED struggled with and I think TED is fine financially. I can only imagine I can only imagine they bet up a huge amount of money during the period where they were like super duper popular to probably last them quite some time. Like, tickets to go to a TED event are so expensive. I looked up, and they do a bunch. I mean, I will say I've been to a TED event. I was invited to a TED event. It was really good couple of days, but it was a mixed bag. Like, it was a climate themed event, and it was a real mix between, like, as I said a moment ago, kind of activists talking about really important stuff, and George Monbiot did a really good talk about the meat industry, which has really stuck with me. I mean, I still eat meat, but it's really stuck with me as a kind of articulation of the ways in which agriculture more broadly as well is kind of like has negative impacts on the environment. But then that stuff sat alongside kind of like a thing by someone from Netflix talking about how storytelling can solve the climate crisis, which I was a bit more like, yeah, but I feel like we've got the stories and it's not really done anything, so I'm not. There's something else there was a bunch of stuff about carbon capture, which is effectively bunk. But I think one of the things it really struggled with was that it kind of has had the Black Mirror effect, where you do something so well that it becomes so culturally dominant that continuing to do the thing looks cliche. And so I think there are a bunch of different things combining in the kind of content creator, YouTuber, whatever it is, space at the moment, which are presenting some challenges. I think the models which are working have kind of shifted. If you go back even 10 years, there was kind of this sense that, you know, if you got 100,000 subscribers and could reliably pull in 200, 300,000 subscribers, 200, 300,000 views per video, like that would be a pretty good, that'd be a pretty good place to be. You could join Patreon and you could probably piece together a pretty healthy living. You could cut down the amount of videos you're putting out so that you only have to do one every year or two or whatever. And I think in some regards, that has often come to be viewed as a sort of model which exists, rather than my view is always that was a bit more of a moment and a reasonably brief one where that was possible, where your kind of like ContraPoints and your H-bombs, etc., came through and very much had that like early mover advantage, right? Of and kind of completely logically and deservedly were doing something that didn't exist at all in the space, in terms of the kind of stuff they were making, and therefore were able to kind of like build up that really kind of wide support in a way that I think is slightly more difficult coming through today, or at the very least that it's much more difficult to rely on those kind of blockbuster videos and to rely on every video being a blockbuster. I remember seeing Abby from Philosophy Tube, I think, posted a thing on Twitter like ages ago now about having to come up with titles to videos because, you know, once upon a time, and I think if you look at like ContraPoints, she's still able to get away with it. ContraPoints is still able to get away with the thing of just going, do you know what? I'm just going to call this video Conspiracy. I'm going to call it Twilight. I'm going to call it The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. But maybe that's a bit more of a catchy one. The Hunger, Envy, etc. And be able to rely on the fact that her pull as a creator, right, is enough that everyone is going to stop what they're doing and watch her video, and like sort of deservedly so, right? These days I think that's a bit more difficult, and like part of that is just more people are doing the thing. Part of it is that we are moving towards a less kind of creator-centric model. So the difference between TikTok and YouTube is pretty notable in terms of the experience of using them. Both websites have some kind of ability to like follow creators. TikTok, I believe they call it, is it just followers I think you have on TikTok? YouTube still has its ability to subscribe to channels. However, there is, on both platforms, those are like quite a subtle indication these days towards the platforms that you want to watch more of that person's stuff. I presume some people do use the tab on TikTok. I think I'm right in saying there's a following tab. I'm sure some people use that. My assumption would be that most people are just sticking on the For You page. YouTube is very similar, right? I'm sure that at least, here we go, like I've watched loads of Wisecrack stuff over the years. It says here, I have never clicked the subscribe button because the system just doesn't really rely on that anymore. Like I'm pretty confident that if I watch a couple of someone's videos that at least in the short term, YouTube's going to serve them to me. it's going to serve their next ones to me, because the system is much more reliant on what you've done recently and whether it should kind of repeat that in the future than it is on whether you've clicked subscribe or not. I mean, let me know in the chat, like, how many of you use the subscriber feed or the subscriptions feed on YouTube, like, as a regular thing that you click onto. And DeWolfie there bringing us on to the next thing, right? So if you rely on the algorithm and the creator does something the algorithm doesn't like, there's a good chance you won't see their new content. A sub is a guarantee that they'll see everything they make. It is if you click onto the sub feed. So I know from looking at the analytics on the back end of YouTube that the number of people who watch videos from either from notifications or from the subs feed is exceptionally low. Maybe there's a bit of selection bias in terms of the fact that possibly the people who use the subscriptions feed on YouTube and the people who are signed up to Twitch to chat maybe has more of a crossover than with the wider population. And I think it's worth saying that some of this is really positive, right? So I've been through fits and bursts of making TikTok videos. I never really do it for very long at all. But one of the things that I've always really liked about it is that you don't have to make a thumbnail. And you make a title, but it doesn't really matter that much. Because actually what it does is it throws your stuff at people, and if they keep watching it, then they keep watching it, right? And if they don't, they don't. And that is, I don't know, that kind of feels really meritocratic in a way that YouTube is a real challenge to sort of get people to watch stuff in the first place. You know, the thumbnails for the videos we put out take a lot of, like, so many revisions to try and get them looking exciting and interesting and clickable, right? With the hope that people will not scroll past them, but will go, oh, this is interesting. And there's something really freeing with when I have spent time making TikTok videos that you have that ability to just be like, the algorithm will take me. And one thing I really like about YouTube of late is that it has been throwing smaller channels kind of into the mix on the homepage in a way that I think is really interesting. I have reasonably regularly of late had videos pop up that have like hundreds of views or like a few thousand views in a way that it feels like a year, 18 months ago or so it sort of didn't really let happen. Pharaoh 3D says, yeah, with TikTok they throw it out to 100 people, and if it's popular you'll get pushed out to the next tier around 1,000 and so on. And I mean, that's very much the way that YouTube works, right? It throws a video out, it sees how many people click on it out of the total number it shows it to. It then sees how long those people watch that video for, and that's kind of how it goes on. You know, if everyone's clicking it and watching the whole thing, it will keep firing it out. If that's not happening so much, that doesn't happen. But I think the real balance at the moment in terms of the kind of new media space, whether that is, I don't know, your small media organizations like your, I don't know, in the UK, your kind of Novara Medias or your Politics Joes, your Voxes, etc. I mean, Vox is massive now, so maybe that's not like the wider company is pretty large now. Or whether that is folks like me or a Wisecrack or an Innuendo Studios, right? I think the balance these days is kind of like, how do you get that balance between making stuff that is high enough production value that it feels like really high quality and makes people come back every time, whilst also trying to keep some kind of schedule up. This is a sort of balance that we've been playing with a lot in terms of, you know, how do we make stuff that we feel is like really, really good, but also be making stuff regularly enough that there's kind of a audience waiting for it, right? Because I think sometimes there's an assumption that the H-bomber guy, ContraPoints, etc. process of being able to put something out every year, maybe every longer, and it being a kind of, and it being really long, and it being like a massive hit, I think that is a far rarer thing to have the ability to do than some creators that I speak to. In fact, I think a few years ago, I was watching a particular creator who I don't know at all, a smaller creator who I was kind of watching them tweet about their process of making a video, and they were sort of really talking about how proud they were that it was going to be sort of the longest, most in-depth piece they've ever made. It was going to be hours and hours and hours and hours, and really feeling concerned that the model that they were trying to work in terms of like length of the video, size of the video, like depth of the video, whatever, and then the kind of like economic model which exists around that to make that possible, maybe was something that was possible for like their heroes or whatever, but was going to be a real challenge for them. You know, so for example, we made a video recently, Postmodernism is Dead, This Is Who Killed It, is what it is currently called. This took like 2 months to make, which in the grand scheme of things is pretty rapid, right? But in terms of like production cost of like making a video is pretty expensive. I think there's a kind of point that you get to in a video making career where you are kind of at this place where you are big enough that A, you have to do things well, and B, you know, you quite rightly can't just rely on people's goodwill and beg, borrow, and steal anymore, right? If you've been doing something for the best part of a decade and you are very clearly like at some kind of professional level, then you should be like paying your way to do all of the stuff, right? But then maybe you're not quite at the point of being a sort of big, I don't know, big sort of media organization, as it were. There can be this real challenge in terms of making anything video related. It just is expensive. It just takes ages, is kind of the and so sort of professional fees and all that kind of stuff just kind of add up. And so we spent like a couple of months making this piece, and the algorithm just didn't like it. It eventually got what's called like limited monetization on YouTube, where YouTube effectively says that it will put some ads on it, but maybe not all the ads, and they'll probably be the least well-paying ads. And in association with that, YouTube staff like to say that the monetization aspect of things and the recommendations aspect of things are completely separate. My experience is that even if those algorithms are separate and don't know about one another, that there are clearly some behaviors that both algorithms kind of mirror one another in, which means that a video which is has its monetization limited for like various sort of content reasons. And it's worth saying that when a video gets kind of limited in its monetization in terms of for content reasons, that's not that it's like broken content rules, it's that there's a kind of softer bit of that where YouTube will allow the video to exist on the platform, but doesn't think that advertisers will want to put videos on it. Those systems might be separate, but clearly there's something shared between them, which means that a video which gets fewer ads and less well-paying ads will also get recommended less, because the system has decided that maybe it's a bit, I don't know, a bit too hot to handle or whatever. Which I will say, I am broadly quite careful about trying to avoid even getting into that spot. And so it was really disappointing. I mean, it took about a week of this video being up for that to be kind of revealed that it was going to be unlimited monetization. At which point that kind of explained the fact that it had been getting it had been doing reasonably well for kind of like click-through rate in terms of people clicking on it. People have been watching it for an average of like 20-something minutes, which is pretty good, right? If you consider the fact that some people will click onto a video, watch it for 10 seconds and be like, nope, and come off. And broadly, like, in relation to other videos that I've made, that is a pretty good metric. And so it then coming back as saying it had limited monetization was sort of explaining a thing that was already happening in a way that was kind of reassuring in a weird way, I guess. But I think it goes, but like when something like that happens, right? We spend 2 months on a video and it just kind of flops, for want of a better word. That like is a real challenge, right? If you take a kind of big swing and you miss, that is tricky, right? And so, I mean, one of the reasons, I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that, I mean, YouTube generally is pretty good for creators, but it is very much the best of a bad bunch. So, you know, YouTube takes every video we make, you know, whether that's we're spending months of writing and a lengthy edit, or whether it's something like this where we're, you know, hopping up to London and we're doing interviews in the Houses of Parliament. You know, we put all the effort into making the video. YouTube takes 45% of the ad revenue, which is a chunk to go. But I'm always aware that we are much more fortunate than anyone who's doing like TikTok or Instagram. TikTok shares very little with creators. Instagram, like Meta, shares nothing with anyone who makes anything for its platforms. And all of these platforms are to an extent reliant on some kind of churn. They are reliant on a new bunch of creators coming through at some point to replace those that are either burned out or couldn't make it work financially or have sold out and fallen off. And I think that's a really difficult system to exist in. I feel really lucky that I've done this for 7-8 years now. And I think we're still kind of making it work. But yeah, I will say that, like, you know, we're reasonably reliant on every so often having one of these that does 1.5 million, because sort of the other option is to like never make anything that's in any way ambitious and to make stuff that is all just me sat here in front of the camera talking, which I think would be a real shame. And so I think there are some real challenges kind of facing the space at the moment. We're also coming into a recession potentially in the US, and that is going to mean that sponsorship deals and people going on advertising, clicking through advertising to buy stuff is likely to go down. That's going to make things challenging for creators to an extent that maybe it was slightly easier, or not easier, that was less difficult before. I also continue to question the Patreon moment. Kind of went quite some time ago now. I think people moved out of the. I think unless you've like just started a new thing and you can like strike while the iron is hot, making a long-term Patreon work these days is really difficult. I mean, I have my own concerns with the company that I've talked about before on YouTube. I made a whole video about it. But Jack Conte is always trying to pitch. Jack Conte, who runs Patreon, is always trying to pitch Patreon as like an alternative to algorithm-based platforms, whilst also kind of trying to make Patreon a sort of rentier platform that can do all the same things that the other platforms do, which is always intriguing to watch. But there's one thing that Ian says in this video where he says that most of the creators that you watch are probably less well off than you think they are, or maybe that's not the phrase he's saying, but like doing less well than you think they are. And I think that's probably true. And I think that's probably one thing that's worth bearing in mind. I think we've been through a few different eras of this kind of space, particularly this kind of like video essay, news, current affairs, politics, that kind of like space. I think there was a period very early on where, being a creator and saying to people, YouTube AdSense isn't very good, it's not very reliable, etc., was something that people really went for, and people really kind of understood. And then I think it got to a point where maybe some people were kind of like stretching that a little bit, that actually the sponsorship deals that were coming in probably were doing okay. And therefore, I think people kind of naturally go, okay, well, these people are all doing all right. And so while I think there are a lot of people, we very much have ups and downs. I mean, just looking at the last 4 months of videos on my channel, we had a 1.5 million, a 425, and then we've had a bit of a flop lately. I think it's and then the ones before are pretty much the same, right? A 2.1 million, a 366, and that's just sort of an advert for the film, but like a 305. It is a lot more swingy and messy these days than I think it has been in the past. I don't know, and I don't know what the path to creators plugging some of that gap whilst not having, if kind of sponsorship money does start to go down, if the US goes into recession or the world goes into recession, in a era where that kind of moment of like fan funding seems to have dissipated a little bit, and it might just have to be continuing to make more stuff. I will say that one of the reasons that there's a couple of reasons why we decided to start doing clips from these live streams and putting them onto YouTube. One of those was that I wanted to do something a bit more frequent. I wanted to do something that was a bit more like, I don't know, if I've got a thing to say or a thing that I want to talk about, I've got the opportunity to do that and can do that in relatively quick turnaround. It doesn't need to be a whole thing that I have to sit down and write. I can sort of get to things quicker. But one of the other things was that actually being able to put out a couple of things a week that are much lower energy to have to make, and yet are kind of bringing in a little bit of ad revenue, was like, yeah, there was also a kind of financial incentive to do that there as well. Pharaoh 3D saying cost of living isn't helping people have less. Just, yeah, absolutely. That's another thing. If just that kind of broad wage stagnation, the kind of spike of cost of living over the last few years as well. Ruffles the Myth saying interesting. I'm pretty sure it was the Just Stop Oil video that got me into your stuff. I will say, so one of the reasons that I like to, I don't know, I like to be in a place where I am proud enough of the stuff that we make that I can still be proud of something even if it doesn't sort of perform particularly well. And I think I'm, the longer I've done this, the more I want videos to do well enough that they get watched enough that we can kind of keep doing it for a bit longer, right? That it's bringing in enough money that we can keep doing it for longer. The hard numbers in terms of viewership aren't something that I like, that for enough themselves I'm overly worried about. So something like, the last video I was pretty pleased with in terms of like how it existed as a video. I'm sure there'll be stuff I do differently again, certainly, but I was pretty pleased with how it turned out. Therefore, the fact that it didn't get loads and loads of views for that thing in and of itself isn't something I'm overly worried about. The fact it got demonetized and stuff and didn't do as well, and like that kind of aspect of it brings less money in and therefore it becomes a bit, things get a little bit hairier in that regard. Like that, I'm like more worried about that. Maybe that sounds really more mercantile. I think it's that I'm happy that if 192,000 people watch something and that is like the audience for that video, and that those people got something out of it, I'm as happy as if the audience for that video was 400,000, right? Thank you so much for watching this clip from my Monday night live stream. If you would like to watch more of these clips and watch them both ad and sponsor free, then you can do so by heading over to Nebula. Nebula is my premium streaming service, which I have been working on with a bunch of other creators for a number of years now. Over there, you can watch all of my normal videos, all the people who are on Nebula's ordinary videos, without sponsors, without ads, and in the highest possible quality. And you can also watch a massive catalogue of exclusive content as well, including my debut feature-length film, Boomers, which is a documentary about the baby boom generation, which saw me travel all around the US and Europe to kind of find out a little bit about the lives and legacy of that generation, where they've landed us in terms of the climate, housing, the economy more broadly, all of that kind of stuff. We've also got exciting new stuff coming out in terms of exclusives all of the time, including Abolish Everything, the new comedy panel show by the team behind Jetlag the Game and Wendover Productions, which has just rolled through its first season and has been so popular that it's already been recommissioned for a second. If you'd like to support what we do here, and that is really much appreciated when people do, then you can sign up to Nebula using my personal link, go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas. That helps to support us in a number of ways. We both get a cut of the watch time when you watch videos over on Nebula, or when you watch our videos at least. We also get a little kickback for recommending that you sign up. And also, some of your monthly subscription or annual subscription goes into a pot to help fund more exclusive shows like Abolish Everything, Boomers, and everything else into the future to keep making the catalogue of stuff we've got on there even better. So I'd really appreciate if you would use my personal link, that is go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas. And I will see you over on Nebula.